Aloha! I'm Denise Yamaguchi. I'm the Executive Director of the Hawaiʻi Agricultural Foundation, and I want to welcome you to our 32nd episode of Eat, Think, Drink, the Blue Economy, Feeding Hawaiʻi First. So tonight we have about 200 registered attendees. That's a pretty big number, so thank you very much to all of you who are interested in discussions about our local agriculture and our food systems. Tonight's program is being recorded and will be available on our website, so please silence your phones and refrain from talking as a courtesy to those presenting this evening. Before our program begins, I want to acknowledge our presenting sponsor, Central Pacific Bank. And with us tonight, we have Bob Yee, who is a Group Senior Vice President and Division Manager, who I'll invite up to say a few words.
Thanks, Denise. In the agriculture industry, which is critical to the economic growth of the state of Hawaii. Central Pacific Bank is also proud to serve as the presenting sponsor for tonight. The program has been beneficial to us and the community in general. Tonight's program, The Blue Economy, highlights the fact that Hawaii consumes more seafood per person than anywhere else in the country. Yet, ironically, most of the seafood we consume is imported. How do we then assure that we can expand our aquaculture industry and grow enough seafood to feed Hawaii first? Those of us who enjoy local fish like onaga, ahi, mahi-mahi, and monchong know how delicious our seafood can be. We have great local products and great chefs. How do we increase capacity to satisfy more demand? Our speakers tonight range from veterinarians to biosecurity experts and educators. Tonight, we can make a strong, compelling case for the growth of this important industry and how we can get there. As a bank that supports locals' sustainability efforts and the growth of our economy, we applaud those efforts and look forward to learning more about them tonight. Thank you also to our co-sponsors for this evening who helped to make this great event possible. Mahalo.
Okay, I also want to thank our other sponsors. We have Alexander and Baldwin, Armstrong Produce, Fresh Point Hawaii, Bear U.S. Crop Science, Hawaii Longline Association, Island Palm Communities, Sentinel, Matson, Prince Waikiki Hotel, the State of Hawaii, Ulupona Initiative, United Airlines, and United Fishing Agency for making Eat, Think, Drink possible. I also want to recognize a few of my board members because they come out every now and then. I have Meredith Ching of our board, and I'm not sure if Dean Okimoto is here. Is Dean here? I guess not. Dean's not here. And of course, Bob. We started Eat, Think, Drink in 2016 to spark meaningful conversations about food and agriculture issues facing our community. The event was never meant to be a one-way dialogue. It was intended to be a mutual learning, and we encourage you to engage with our speakers and others throughout the evening. In Hawaii, seafood is more than just what we eat. It's part of who we are. We consume more seafood per capita than almost anywhere else in the country, and yet the majority of our seafood is imported. That reality brings us to the heart of tonight's conversation. At a time when food security, ocean health, and public investment in agriculture are all under the microscope, we're faced with an urgent and important question. How do we grow agriculture that feeds Hawaii first and strengthens our communities? Tonight's theme, the Blue Economy, challenges us to think beyond just production. It invites us to consider how we can responsibly steward our ocean resources, support local producers, and build systems that are resilient, sustainable, and rooted in place. We're here to explore what's possible and what it will take, who needs to be involved, and how we can move forward together. Our keynote speaker this evening brings a global perspective grounded right here in Hawaii. Neil Anthony Sims is the founder and CEO of Ocean Era, a pioneer in regenerative aquaculture and ocean open farming. His work has been at the forefront of reimagining how we produce seafood, moving beyond the nearshore limitations to responsibly grow fish in deeper offshore environments. As we think about how we reduce Hawaii's dependence on imported seafood, Neil will share his bold and practical vision of what's possible. He brings deep expertise in scaling aquaculture in a way that supports ocean health, supports local food systems, and aligns with the principles of the blue economy. Tonight, he'll explore what it will take to build a sustainable, locally rooted aquacultural industry and how innovation on the water can translate into resilience on our plates. Please join me in welcoming Neil Anthony Sims.
Aloha kako. And mahalo Denise and Hawaii Ag Foundation for the invitation to speak tonight. Thank you to the sponsors and to Sarah for all the organisation and to the fellow panellists, which will help provide perhaps some broader perspective on what I might speak to here tonight. Feeding Hawaiʻi first. We are deeply connected to the ocean, and any long-term vision for how we are going to be sustainable in our food systems has to involve the ocean. What I want to speak to here tonight is just the fundamental arithmetic of just more of us is going to mean fewer fish, and so we have to start to grow the fish that we want to be eating. Hawaii has been a true pioneer in offshore aquaculture, but very few folk are aware of that because it happens out there. One of the big challenges for scaling up any sort of aquaculture is what are you going to feed the fish? And then I'm going to conclude with some of the big picture, future arm-waving exhortations about where we want to go. So the fundamental arithmetic is pretty depressing. There are more and more of us, 9 to 10 billion people by 2050. We're going to be increasingly affluent. We have more spending power, and when we have that, we want to buy more seafood. Because A, we love eating seafood, B, our doctors are telling us that we should be eating more seafood, and we also know increasingly there's greater awareness that it is less impactful. It's the more environmentally responsible thing to do. However, the history with seafood scaling is pretty bleak. If we don't manage our wild stocks well, this is what happens. This is the classic fisheries biology lesson of a really badly managed fishery, where we thought there were times when fisheries biologists would say, oh, the North Atlantic cod, we could never overfish those stocks, they're so abundant. Well, you create enough incentives for people and they will go and hammer something to economic extinction. In 1992, this went from over 800,000 tonnes per year, it went to zero. They shut the fishery down. And the true tragedy here is that those stocks have never recovered. Still to this day, there is no significant commercial cod fishery in the North Atlantic. Actually, it's not just cod. The North Atlantic is perhaps the best example, the best documented example of this. This is back in 1900, where the red is very dense stocks of fish, over 11 tonnes per kilometre squared, and the pale blue is where there's very few fish. So this is in 1900, and then you add on diesel engines and onboard freezers and onboard processing and pair trawling, and 100 years later, the fish are gone. It's a little bit stunning. Let's go back and have a look at that again. 1900, red is choke fish. 100 years later, they didn't just disappear, we took them. And it's only through very careful nursing and very careful management of stocks that they will have any hope of recovery. So there is some good news here. In the US, about 30 or 40 years ago, they started to recognize this challenge and started to really implement some rigorous management measures that allowed stocks to recover. One of the shining examples of this is here in Hawaii, the Deep Seven, or Pakapaka, Ehu, and Onaga. In 2006, it was classified by NOAA as overfished. and very rigid management measures put on place around that fishery. It's why for years you could hardly find any of the deep 7 fish in the market. By 2018, it had recovered. However, the challenge here is that it only recovered because they put catch limits on there, 247 tonnes in 2024. That's great. That means that for the long term, these stocks are going to remain viable, but it means that there is a limit to what we can take. Another example is the West Coast rockfish. Again, this is a deep water fish, cold water, very slow growing. In 2000, it was declared a disaster. They shut the fishery down, the commercial fishery down almost completely. By 2018, they said stocks had recovered enough that they could start to fish commercially again. However, they were only able to do this because in 2002 they had a massive buyback of 90 boats, over 90 boats that they bought back. Your tax dollars were used to buy these fishing boats to take them out, just to reduce the fishing pressure. This is the key. To get to sustainable fisheries, you have to have really careful management measures in there, and you have to be able to reduce the fishing pressure when it's needed. The better management means less fishing and less fish, essentially. More fish in the long term, but less fish right then and there. In Hawaii, this population challenge that I was speaking about earlier is really critical. We've had over a 10x increase in the population over the last 120 years. More people means more fish, more fishing, and fewer fish. This is most clearly displayed by this graph here, where over on the left-hand side here is where there's lots of people, south shore of Oahu and the other protected shores. Where there's more of us and there's more access to the coastline, there are fewer fish. Yet over on the right-hand side, where you're looking at the northeast shores, which are fewer people and generally less heavily populated, there are more fish. And then over on the northwest Hawaiian Islands, fish are plenty there because there is less fishing pressure. So we need to have rigid management, we need to have robust management measures in place that are flexible, not rigid, to allow for this, to implement the management that we need to see to allow these stocks to be sustainable in the long term. Now here in Hawaii, the local catch just for consumption, what you like go catch, eat for yourself and the family, 5,000 tonnes per year. That is a significant amount, but it pales in comparison with actual seafood sales, commercial fishing. Over $600 million, around 19,000 tonnes per year. As folks have already mentioned a couple of times, over 2/3 of the fish that we consume here in the state is imported. That's around 15,000 tonnes per year of import. If we're going to feed Hawaiʻi First, we need to find 15,000 tonnes per year. Part of what's really sad about this is that 90% of that is coming from other countries. We are essentially eating other people's lunch. Now, to give this number of 15,000 tonnes per year in perspective, remember when I was talking about the deep 7 fishery, that the catch limits that they had put on that fishery to keep it sustainable were, anybody remember the number? 247 tonnes in a year. It's about 1/60th of the imports here. So yes, we can chip away at that 15,000 tonnes through better fisheries management, but really to be able to start to feed ourselves, we have to be able to grow the seafood that we need. Hawaii has been blessed with Loko ia, which are perhaps the most advanced marine fish culture system in the world for centuries. This is a phenomenal array of fish ponds, as you would call them, throughout the islands that were very carefully managed and that provide an abundance of fish. The tragedy is that many of those have fallen into disrepair. There have been remarkable efforts. Brenda's going to speak some more on this later this evening about the energy and the efforts that have gone into restoration of these ponds, and there are somewhere between 10 or 20 of these ponds around the islands that are now actively managed and producing fish. They're also just a great mechanism for cultural connection and community cohesion when people get out and rebuild a Loko ia pa. That's a phenomenal thing to see a community doing that. But it's not going to go a long way towards getting to scale that we need to be able to feed, to meet that 15,000 tonne per year shortfall. There's also a lot of aquaculture around the world in land-based systems, either like the shrimp ponds that we have here on the western coastline of Kauai, or there's also a lot of excitement around recirculating aquaculture systems where you have the fish in tanks and you move the water around from the tanks around through filtration systems and then back to the fish again. However, these are really energy-intensive systems. You're needing to pump the water and you're needing to provide oxygen and then all of that filtration work as well. And so I don't know about what the electricity costs here in Oahu. Down in Kona, it's 46 cents per kilowatt hour. And that means that any RAS system, any land-based system that's going to use a lot of electricity, it's just not going to be economically viable. And it's not going to be an efficient use of our resources. And so I'm a big fan of offshore aquaculture. Enough of a fan that I've devoted a large part of my life towards this. And I believe that this is a way that we can start to make a significant dent in this 15,000 tonne a year shortfall, that offshore we can scale, because this is very energy efficient. Mother Nature, through the ocean currents, provides the water exchange and the oxygen that we need. We've got net pens out there that have been able to demonstrate that we can do this with minimal impact on the ocean ecosystems that are surrounding it. And you can expand this industry out to the blue horizon and beyond. You could go out to the 200-mile zone, or there are even visions of expanding out into international waters. There is potential to scale offshore aquaculture. We aren't constrained by land mass availability. So Hawaii, as it said, has been a real pioneer in developing offshore aquaculture. Part of this is just the blessings of our geography, that we have through the island chain, we have protection from the northwest surf and the trade winds along the lee shores of the islands. And it's also because in these protected waters, there's a very steep drop-off. There's no continental shelf. That's actually a good thing, because deep water is our friend. Deep water and good currents are where you're going to have better environmental conditions for the fish. And you don't want to have to go 40 or 50 or 60 miles out over the continental shelf to be able to get to water that's deep enough. And so that really is an advantage here. So this was originally pioneered by Hawaii Sea Grant. University of Hawaii Sea Grant program had gone and done a demonstration net pen project using these sea stations, this submersible spaceship flying saucer-shaped sort of net pen here that is allowed to be 10 metres down below the surface, and so the storms will just blow over the top of that. Randy Cates had then converted that project into a commercial operation where they were producing moi, the king of fish, up to 300 tonnes per year. And over the 15 years that project had been in operation, there was no significant environmental impact from that. That's real validation of the fact that we can scale offshore without running into these impacts. So I was one of the co-founders of down in Kona. We saw what Randy had done here and we thought we should be able to scale this to other parts of the islands, and we set up Kona Blue Water Farms directly out off the airport. If you've landed at the airport in Kona in the last 20 years and looked out on the Makai side there, you may have seen these net pens that are raised out there. It's only a half-mile out offshore, but it's in water that's over 200 feet deep. It's very close to Keholi Point, so there are very brisk currents through there. It's over a bare sand bottom. And that distance offshore of just a half mile, it doesn't sound really like offshore aquaculture, but to the west, there's nothing between these net pens and China, 5,000 miles away. And to the south, there's nothing between these net pens and Antarctica, over 8,000 miles away. So on a bouncy day, as Federico is going to be able to validate later, on a bouncy day out there, it sure feels like it is offshore. Again, it's in deep water and brisk currents, and that's the real key, because over the 21 years of operation there has been no significant impact either on the water quality or on the seabed that's underneath the net pen, or on the beautiful stretch of coral reef. If you've ever gone down to Kona and done the diving with the manta rays, I encourage, if you have not done it, buy yourself a plane ticket and get down there pronto, please. Diving with the manta rays is a phenomenal thing, and it's over this beautiful stretch of coral reef there. And if there had been any impact, on any night there's 10, 15, 20 dive tour operators on that reef out there with their tourists, and if there had been any impact on that coral reef from that fish farm a half-mile away, we would have heard about it. There would have been kicking and screaming, and instead there's crickets. Or actually, a lot of the dive tour operators like to take their boats out past the fish pens and show their guests what offshore aquaculture looks like before they go and do their manta ray dive. The operation that Fedi represents, Blue Ocean Mariculture, now does around 900 tonnes per year, and they're planning to expand that up to around 1,500 tonnes per year. That doesn't look like it should. You should be able to see a picture of the kampachi there at the top, and some other pictures of sashimi. But one thing that this company has done really, really well over the last 10 years or so is to be able to focus more of their sales here in state. That's around 2/3 of the fish are sold here in Hawaii. So let's think about how that now compares with this goal that we've got of 15,000 tonnes per year, and their aspiration is to build up to 1,500 tonnes per year. You can do the arithmetic there. It's about 10 farms, so we're about 10% of the way there to meeting this shortfall that we have. One of the concerns that people often have when we're talking about offshore aquaculture is, well, what about the fishing community? You know, this is going to be a problem for them. You're going to be limiting access for them to be able to get at their fish. And actually, the opposite is very true. This is what we call the Velella demonstration projects. These were when we pioneered permitting out in federal waters down off the Big Island. So this was a single net pen in water that was 6,000 feet deep, 6 miles out offshore of the Big Island. You can see the Big Island up there in the right-hand corner. And this is the mooring ball in front that was attached to the anchor, and then the feed barge that you see in the very foreground here. And you see around there, typical of what you would see on any morning out around this demonstration pen. There'd be 10, 15, 20 boats catching mahi-mahi, wahoo, tuna, hand over fist. The local fishermen loved this. It worked as what's called a fish aggregating device, which is, you know them all as the fishing buoys. That's where you want to go fishing when you're going after pelagics here. And the best validation of this was, these are only demonstration projects, so it was only one batch of fish. And when we had to take the second net pen out at the end of this project, I had a fisherman come up to me in Honokahau Harbour and grab me by the metaphorical lapels and say, "Please don't take that fish pen out. That's the best fishing I've had in my life." One of the big regrets in my career is that I didn't have a video camera going when he said that. But you'll just have to trust me. One of the other concerns that folk have about scaling up aquaculture is, what do we feed the fish? Well, we feed them the same sorts of things that you'd feed your cat or your dog. It's a formulated diet that's a balance of proteins and lipids. It just looks a pellet like this. Back 30 or 40 years ago, there's a lot of fish meal and fish oil that went into that because we knew that that's what fish eat, but that was sort of feeding fish to grow fish. What's happened in the last 20 or 30 years is this increased level of understanding of fish nutrition and incorporation of a lot of agricultural proteins and oils into the diet that has reduced what we call the fish in, fish out ratio. How many pounds of fish has got to go into that? And one of the other examples here in Hawaii, where there's some real pioneering work, Diamond Headers Fisheries have set up a processing plant where they take the wastes, they take the fillet off a tuna, and then you're left with the frame. They're going and processing that frame and those offcuts into fish meal and fish oil and incorporating that into local aquaculture diets. So it is now possible for a number of these species to get to what we call this holy grail of a pound of fish out for a pound of fish in. Here in Oceanera, we're also working with a fish we think could be a true champion of this. This here is known as the nanue. It's a local herbivore on the reef. Most of the fish that are farmed in the ocean are carnivores. You think of kampachi or salmon or grouper, but in freshwater, most of the fish that are farmed are herbivores. They eat plants, and this is far better in terms of the cost, the feed input, but it's also far better in terms of global sustainability. So we're really excited about the potential for growing nanue or chubs here, and to be able to feed them diets, the same sort of feed that you would feed to a tilapia. And we don't have samples here for you tonight, but trust me, it tastes like a snapper. We're also looking at ways that you could be growing limu to feed to these fish, because that's what they naturally eat in the wild. But let's not just think about feeding the fish. If we're talking about limu, this is something that we want to eat as well. Here in Hawaii, we have this tremendous tradition of eating limu. And so one of the things we're doing down at the Natural Energy Lab, and you'll be able to sample some of this from some of the chef stations here tonight, is our Kona limu. We're growing these different species there, and we have them now in retail outlets here, in FarmLink, in Down to Earth Organics, and also Alan Wong and Roy Yamaguchi are also championing these fish these limu on their menu. We're also really excited. Gina Y, from the inimitable Gina Y from Okonokai, is using our dried lepe or hina, the red, or what we're calling Kona dragon's breath, drying that and incorporating that into limu crackers, and that's available at a number of the retail outlets here on Oahu. Thanks, Gina. So, the future. Where does this go long term? We are working Ocean Era to reactivate the moi farm off Ever Beach. We've been talking to the community there now for the last 5 or 6 years. There's a lot of excitement about getting moi back onto the menu. We're hoping to resubmit. We've been talking to the state, and we'll resubmit the permit applications hopefully this year. And then a couple of years perhaps we would have that farm operational then. And that would be producing, again, moi. We'd like to start with small scale, a couple of cages. These would be, again, submersible pens, but they're a different design that allows us to be able to get out there more, get our arms around the fish in these pens. Initial goal would be 450 tonnes per year, but we would want to be able to expand, because we have this shortfall of 15,000 tonnes, we'd want to be able to expand to around 2,400 tonnes per year over time as we're able to prove that out and build the market. This is how we think we can really get to scale here in these islands, with offshore aquaculture in deep water out further offshore. But we want to just feed Hawaiʻi first. We want to also think about feeding the planet, because remember, we've been eating other people's fish, and for that, it's really interesting for us to be looking at what is happening in China and Norway, 2 countries where people love their seafood, and China has been very much focused on feeding China first. They are deploying massive structures that look more like oil rigs. These are going out into deep sites very far out offshore, where they're growing thousands of tons of fish at a time. In Norway, they're building structures like tankers, the size of oil tankers, where they're doing 10,000 tons at a time. And China is also deploying now what is like a bulk ore carrier up in the top left-hand corner there that you see, where that is able to, they have tanks on board that ore carrier there to be able to culture the fish in. So this is where the rest of the world is going with offshore aquaculture. I think there are things that we can learn from that. We want to keep our eye on that. I don't think we want to go quite to that scale yet. There's plenty that we can do with just building this out in a way that makes sense for us here in Hawaii. Thank you very much for your attention. I really look forward to the questions. Aloha.